At the end of May, as night fell and everyone left work, 22-year-old Isaac Reynolds stepped out of the fast food restaurant where he worked, ready to wrap up a long day. But no one could have guessed that it would be the last time he was seen alive. After his late shift, Isaac didn't return home. Calls and messages from his family went unanswered. Worry began to mount when Isaac didn't show up the next morning. There were no signs of an accident or trouble, but he had vanished without a trace. Day by day, Isaac's family and friends searched for him while the police launched an investigation. Despite reviewing nearby surveillance cameras, everything led to dead ends. On July 1st, more than a month after Isaac disappeared, a construction crew discovered a body in an abandoned building far from the residential area. It was Isaac. When the body was transported to the forensic center, the specialists were horrified by what they found. Isaac had died in a gruesome state, with marks on his body revealing the horrific torture he endured. This was far from a simple disappearance. It was a brutal case of abduction, torture, and murder. Isaac's body bore severe injuries, and the markings on his skin were not mere cuts or bruises. Forensic experts confirmed he had endured a month of excruciating torture, held captive and treated as nothing more than an object of abuse. With these initial findings, the police began to explore the motives behind the crime. They discovered that Isaac had no prior connection to the individuals responsible for his abduction. All they knew was that Isaac had been targeted by two men with histories of violent and depraved sexual behavior. This made the case all the more horrifying, as evidence revealed that Isaac was treated as a tool to satisfy the dark desires of these men. The perpetrators seemed to have no specific reason other than seeing their victim as an object to fulfill their twisted cravings. The investigation uncovered more chilling details about the violence Isaac endured during the past month. As the full picture emerged, no one could comprehend how a young man like Isaac, with his whole future ahead of him, could fall victim to such a heinous crime. His death not only inflicted unimaginable pain on his family, but also served as a stark reminder to society. Evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, and atrocities like this can happen in just an instant. Isaac Reynolds, a 22-year-old young man, was the embodiment of a promising future, working part-time at a fast food restaurant in the city. With a healthy physique and a constant smile on his face, Isaac was loved by everyone around him. He had an open, friendly personality and was always willing to help others, which is why his friends and colleagues felt at ease in his presence. Isaac also had big dreams and a clear goal: to attend college and pursue a degree in computer science, a field he had been passionate about since childhood. Isaac's life was on an upward trajectory, filled with bright plans for the future. But all of that changed one late May night, when everything about Isaac was reduced to an unfinished story. On the evening of May 30th, after a late-night shift at the fast food restaurant, Isaac left work, saying goodbye to his colleagues as usual. The image of him stepping out of the restaurant, the glow of streetlights reflecting on the pavement, became the last moment anyone saw him. No one thought it would be the final time they saw Isaac. That night, he didn't return home as he always did. There were no calls, no messages, just absolute silence. The next morning, when Isaac was still missing, his family began to worry. Isaac's mother, who loved her son deeply, tried calling him, but there was no response. His father and older brother began searching everywhere, calling friends and coworkers, but no one knew where he was. They began to sense something was terribly wrong. Realizing Isaac was missing, the family immediately reported the case to the police. A swift investigation was launched, but nothing came easily. Investigators found no clear leads, no signs of an accident or any dangerous situation. The only clues were his car, still parked in its usual spot, and some blurry footage from nearby security cameras too unclear to provide any concrete details. Everything seemed to be a mystery. Isaac had vanished inexplicably, and no one knew why or who might be responsible. That eerie silence plunged his family into deep anguish. Someone had disappeared without leaving a trace. With each passing minute, the fear grew, as no one knew what might happen next. Isaac's family could only pray for good news, but all they faced was an agonizing wait in the dark. As the disappearance of Isaac Reynolds began to attract attention, investigators struggled to find substantial leads. Despite extensive efforts by the police and his family, clear evidence remained elusive. However, a small clue emerged from an unexpected source: surveillance footage from a security camera near the area where Isaac was last seen. On an early morning shortly after Isaac's disappearance, police collected all available surveillance footage from cameras around the fast food restaurant where he had last been seen. While most of the footage was blurry and lacked clarity to reveal significant details, one particular video stood out as a faint glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. In the footage, two men appeared to approach Isaac as he left the restaurant and headed toward his car. Though the video could not capture clear details of their faces, their presence at the exact time and place of Isaac's disappearance was undeniable. The video showed Isaac seemingly unconcerned, likely unaware of the danger approaching him. The two men, one tall and the other shorter, walked casually toward Isaac's car. They appeared unremarkable, not drawing much attention, but their presence during those critical moments in Isaac's life added a troubling complexity to the case. Investigators couldn't help but ask, who were they? Could they be connected to Isaac's disappearance? Those questions were soon answered as the police began to investigate the two men. Using intelligence and additional leads from witnesses, the identities of the two suspects gradually came to light. They were Owen Ford and Ben Walker, two criminals with extensive records of violent, predatory, and sexual offenses. Owen, the taller man in the footage, had a history of brutal assaults on female victims. Though he had never been convicted for his heinous acts, his criminal record was filled with horrifying allegations. Ben, the shorter man, had an equally dark past. He had been investigated for several sexual assaults but had repeatedly evaded justice due to legal loopholes. Both men shared one disturbing trait: a twisted obsession with committing unforgivable crimes. As investigators delved deeper into Owen and Ben's past, they uncovered a chilling pattern. The two had a history of bizarre partnerships, often engaging in violent acts, and even planning and executing kidnappings to satisfy their depraved desires. One notable discovery was that both had previously participated in sexual assaults against victims who, out of fear or lack of evidence, had never pressed charges, allowing the duo to escape serious consequences. The revelations about Owen and Ben fueled fears that Isaac might have become their latest target. While no direct evidence linked them to Isaac's disappearance, investigators couldn't ignore the suspicious circumstances. First, their presence near the location of Isaac's disappearance was an alarming coincidence. Second, surveillance footage suggested they might have been watching Isaac for some time, as they seemed to know exactly where he parked his car. Finally, both Owen and Ben's criminal histories involving predatory and violent behavior made them the prime suspects. Police quickly decided to launch a manhunt for the two men. The mounting evidence was too significant to overlook, and the subsequent pursuit was not just about finding Owen and Ben, but also uncovering any secrets they might be hiding. Authorities collaborated with other agencies to comb through every lead that could reveal the suspects' whereabouts. What followed was a tense chase, with time slipping away and Isaac's fate hanging in the balance. On July 10th, after a harrowing month without any leads, a horrifying discovery changed everything. The body of 22-year-old Isaac Reynolds, who had gone missing at the end of May, was finally found in an abandoned house far from the residential area. Police received a report from a nearby resident who had noticed an unusual foul odor emanating from the abandoned building. When the investigative team arrived at the scene, what they found made their hearts sink. Isaac was lying on the floor, his body far from intact, a gruesome sight that told a story of unspeakable violence. The first indications made it clear that this was no natural death. The injuries on his body revealed a tale of brutal torture that was unimaginable. Bloodstains covered the floor, deep wounds marred his body, and especially horrifying were the tears and lacerations around his genital area. All of it confirmed that Isaac had endured prolonged torture and sexual assault during the time he was missing. The scene inside the abandoned house added to the horror. It was not just a neglected building, it had been turned into a prison for Isaac, where his captors had kept him restrained and subjected him to unspeakable cruelty. Evidence showed that Isaac had been tied up and threatened for days on end. The tools of torture found at the scene chilled even the most seasoned investigators: ropes, duct tape, and even metal hooks, all of which had been used to keep Isaac subdued and subjected to his captor's sadistic whims. These discoveries brought a clearer picture of the events but made the case all the more harrowing. Police found remnants of the tools used in the torture, possibly the very items used to restrain Isaac, along with traces of the suspect's presence. Particularly striking were a long rope wrapped around Isaac's neck, duct tape that had been used to blindfold him, and the marks of abuse on his body that left investigators speechless. The dried bloodstains told a story of prolonged suffering and a crime spanning weeks. At this point, there was no longer any doubt about the motive behind Isaac's death. This was not an accident, it was a calculated murder characterized by extreme violence and a clear motive: the gratification of the perpetrator's depraved desires. The case opened a dark window into the heinous capabilities of these individuals, who treated Isaac not as a person but as an object for their twisted satisfaction. Isaac's death was not the result of random violence. It was the culmination of a meticulously planned act of brutality meant to break him both physically and mentally. Investigators quickly realized that Isaac's death was the result of a carefully orchestrated plan. Every step of his captivity had been meticulously calculated, and the torture he endured was not impulsive but deliberate, designed to shatter his spirit and body. Isaac's death was not just a physical tragedy. It was a cruel form of domination by those who saw him as nothing more than a defenseless plaything. When Isaac's body was brought to the morgue, police conducted further tests and gathered additional evidence. Forensic experts confirmed that Isaac had died from the severity of his injuries after a prolonged period of captivity and enduring repeated sexual assaults. His death marked not only the tragic end of a young man's life, but also a grueling pursuit of justice against the perpetrators. Each new piece of evidence uncovered made the case darker and more terrifying, driving the investigators to leave no stone unturned in their quest to hold the perpetrators accountable. After identifying the individuals connected to the disappearance and brutal death of Isaac Reynolds, police shifted their focus to uncovering the motives of Owen and Ben. They quickly realized that, while there wasn't yet enough concrete evidence to convict them in this case, both men had dark, violent, and disturbing pasts that defied imagination. Piecing together this information was no easy task, but over time, investigators began to see the fragments of a horrifying picture come into focus. As police interviewed people who had interacted with Owen and Ben, chilling stories about their past began to surface. Neighbors, acquaintances, and those who had crossed paths with the two men recounted incidents of disturbing behavior and a history of expressing perverse tendencies. They had no qualms about using force to satisfy their darkest desires. What frustrated investigators the most was the pattern of leniency these men had received. Despite having committed numerous violent acts, including kidnappings and sexual assaults, they had repeatedly evaded legal consequences due to a lack of evidence or the silence of their victims. Previous cases against them had been dismissed or buried, leaving a trail of injustice. Police didn't stop at local testimonies. They turned to social media and online platforms in search of digital evidence. Eventually, chat logs and online messages were uncovered, revealing parts of a sinister plan orchestrated by Owen and Ben before Isaac's abduction. The messages showed that the two had meticulously discussed and planned the kidnapping of a young man to fulfill their depraved desires. They had exchanged ideas about methods, locations, and strategies to execute their scheme. The most chilling revelation, however, was that Isaac had not been a specific target. He was chosen purely at random for a reason that sent shivers down everyone's spine. As investigators dug deeper, they confirmed that Isaac had no prior connection to Owen or Ben. He had never met them before and had no personal conflicts or ties that might explain why they targeted him. This made the case even more terrifying. Isaac, a 22-year-old with a promising future, had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Police didn't stop at local testimonies. They turned to social media and online platforms in search of digital evidence. Eventually, chat logs and online messages were uncovered, revealing parts of a sinister plan orchestrated by Owen and Ben before Isaac's abduction. The messages showed that the two had meticulously discussed and planned the kidnapping of a young man to fulfill their depraved desires. They had exchanged ideas about methods, locations, and strategies to execute their scheme. The most chilling revelation, however, was that Isaac had not been a specific target. He was chosen purely at random for a reason that sent shivers down everyone's spine. As investigators dug deeper, they confirmed that Isaac had no prior connection to Owen or Ben. He had never met them before and had no personal conflicts or ties that might explain why they targeted him. This made the case even more terrifying. Isaac, a 22-year-old with a promising future, had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. For Owen and Ben, his selection wasn't driven by any personal grudge, but rather because he fit their twisted criteria as an easily controllable victim. Police analyzed Isaac's background and behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance. They found that he was a reserved and somewhat introverted young man, with a quiet demeanor that made him less likely to draw attention or defend himself. His lack of self-defense skills made him an easy target for predators like Owen and Ben, who sought victims not only for their sexual gratification, but also for their ease of psychological and physical domination. This further clarified the motives of the perpetrators. Isaac's personality and vulnerability made him an ideal target for Owen and Ben's warped desires. They didn't choose him because of any specific connection, but simply because they believed he wouldn't be able to resist or escape their control. Investigators concluded that this was the primary reason Isaac became the victim of a month-long ordeal of unimaginable torture, a nightmare from which he couldn't defend himself. As the image of Isaac became clearer in the investigators' minds, they saw a young man full of potential yet unprepared to navigate the dangers of a society where predators like Owen and Ben lurked. To the two men, Isaac was merely a tool for their horrific pursuits. The online chats and covert discussions between Owen and Ben revealed not only a well-crafted plan but also their meticulous preparation for every possible scenario. Yet one question lingered: why Isaac? The answer, tragically, may never fully be understood. After police identified Owen and Ben as the perpetrators in Isaac Reynolds' disappearance and brutal death, the investigation began to gain clarity through witness testimonies. Every detail in the case pointed to the calculated and horrifying cruelty of the two men. Isaac's co-workers at the fast food restaurant where he worked provided crucial information. They recalled that Isaac was a quiet young man with few friends who didn't draw much attention to himself. However, some co-workers mentioned that they had noticed Isaac being followed by two men later confirmed as Owen and Ben in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. These suspicious signs had initially gone unnoticed, but when combined with other witness accounts, police recognized this was far from a random incident. Police also gathered statements from individuals who had connections to Owen and Ben. Several witnesses reported overhearing secretive exchanges between the two, during which they discussed unsettling plans. These conversations hinted at the cruelty that occupied their minds. A former friend of Owen revealed that he had once heard about the depraved tendencies shared by Owen and Ben, things they had never openly disclosed. From these testimonies, investigators concluded that Owen and Ben's actions were not impulsive but premeditated, deliberate, and exceptionally ruthless. As the case moved toward resolution, police uncovered significant physical evidence. Surveillance footage from areas near where Isaac was abducted, coupled with the clear injuries on his body discovered post-mortem, painted a vivid picture of Owen and Ben's heinous crimes. Blurry security camera footage captured the two approaching Isaac on the night he disappeared. While the images were not clear enough for definitive identification, experts noted critical details that helped police trace the perpetrator's movements. The injuries on Isaac's body told the rest of the story. He endured unimaginable torture during his month-long captivity. From bruises to deep penetrating wounds, the evidence underscored not just the brutality but also the animalistic methods employed by the two men. After an intense and grueling investigation, Owen and Ben were finally apprehended and brought to trial. During the court proceedings, their demeanor only added to the horror. Showing no signs of remorse or regret, Owen and Ben shockingly claimed their actions were merely a means of fulfilling personal desires. These statements sent chills through everyone in the courtroom and fueled investigators' anger at the sheer lack of humanity. They had treated Isaac not as a person but as a mere tool for their dark, twisted gratification. The evidence collected by police, from the surveillance footage to the physical marks on Isaac's body, became powerful tools for the prosecution. Those in the courtroom were deeply moved by the harrowing details of Isaac's ordeal and struggled to comprehend how anyone could inflict such cruelty on another human being. Forensic experts confirmed that the injuries Isaac endured over the course of a month were the result of calculated, intentional acts of torture, a meticulously planned assault with a clear, malicious purpose. In the end, Owen and Ben could not escape justice. The trial concluded with both men being sentenced to death. They would face the ultimate punishment for the unspeakable suffering they had caused and for robbing a young man of his life in such a merciless way. The brutality of this case shook the community to its core and ignited widespread outrage among the public. Throughout the trial, Owen and Ben's testimonies made one thing painfully clear. This was not merely a loss of humanity. It was a crime so monstrous that no justification could ever suffice. The death of Isaac Reynolds was not just a personal tragedy but a profound shock to the entire community. Every detail of the case, from the brutality he endured to the cold-heartedness of his perpetrators, shook his neighborhood and the city to its core. The community where Isaac lived, his friends, colleagues, and family were plunged into a state of grief and disbelief. They could not comprehend how a promising young man, simply leaving work one evening, could meet such a cruel and tragic fate. What made this case even more horrifying was not only Isaac's death, but the alarming societal issue it highlighted: the lack of adequate protections for victims of sexual violence. Isaac's story forced the community to question the current legal system and its failure to safeguard vulnerable individuals from violent acts. The brutality of what Isaac endured sent shockwaves through the community, sparking heated debates about how society addresses sexual crimes, similar cases, and the unheard voices of victims. Unable to accept the indifference of the authorities, many victim advocacy organizations quickly took action. They began pushing for sweeping changes in legislation, demanding stricter measures to protect those at risk of assault. These campaigns not only called for legal reform but also sought to foster a society where victims of crime could find justice and the protection they deserve. Advocacy groups emphasized the need for education programs about personal rights and self-defense measures to empower individuals, especially the vulnerable, to recognize their own strength and prioritize their safety. The case of Isaac Reynolds became a painful reminder of the devastating harm that perpetrators of sexual violence can inflict. At the same time, it served as a rallying cry for meaningful change in how society and the legal system address such crimes. Isaac's death left an irreplaceable void in the lives of his family and friends, but it also became a catalyst for greater efforts to build a fairer and safer society for everyone.